Not another one. Ah yes, the dreaded international break is here once again, and with it comes some of the worst and most consistent whinging, moaning and crying that the sport ever sees, as the British public rapidly and collectively cycles through the 7 stages of grief at the prospect of there simply being no Premier League football for a single weekend. For an outsider unaware of the context, the discourse from football fans regarding a break in top division fixtures for some international games must seem akin to breaking news that the world is ending. Everywhere you look, someone seems furious, as if the international break has crept up on them and surprised them out of nowhere with the worst news imaginable. A weekend of no club football this soon into the season is their waking nightmare, an unthinkable hellscape, a world they don't want to live in. Go to any tweet, post or short form video on any social media site of your choosing and you will see furious comments under any mention of the international break, as the public foams at the mouth at the thought of having to endure yet another one of these. I hate the international break. No one cares about the Nations League. I wish my club would stop all of our players from going. Why do we all allow this to happen? It's all pointless and boring. Nobody mentioned that we've got another break 4 weeks from now in November. Heads will roll. But if you'll allow me to, let's take a step back, calm ourselves down and have a look at the bigger picture. Because you're all wrong about the international break, and I'll tell you why. Let's start with the most frequent response used time and time again by football fans frantically typing in comment sections across the internet, and undoubtedly will be seen in the comment section below this very video. And that's, nobody cares about the international break. My God, how I wish sometimes that this was actually true. For something that no one seems to care about, there is an awful lot of discourse about it every time it rolls around. You can't go 5 minutes without someone mentioning the break, the competition, or the wider implications it all might have. And this is before the squads are announced. For something that apparently no one cares about, there sure is an awful lot of discussion about who should be called up, who shouldn't be called up, who deserves their place and who doesn't. Should Rashford be in? Should Harvey Barnes be in? What has Grealish done to warrant being selected? Why does bloody Southgate keep picking Phillips or Jordan Henderson? Should we move on from Harry Kane? When will Elliott or Jones or Tyrick Mitchell get their chance? It might actually be quite nice for England to just drop the squad list, everyone to shrug their shoulders and we get on with the games. But that's not what happens, because whether you like it or not, people do care about the games and they care about the makeup of the national squad. And outside of the online discourse, the level of interest is reflected in the stands as well. England sell out every single away allocation for every single game. You're not getting an England away ticket unless you're dedicated. And when at home, England sell out Wembley for practically every single game also. Opponent big or small, Wembley is full of fans who have paid to watch England. England fill Wembley for games against Brazil and Belgium, but they also fill Wembley for games against Ukraine and Iceland. On the occasion they're not playing in London, they sell out in Southampton and in Manchester too. Even on the rare occasion when Wembley isn't a sellout, it's still close. England v Finland, the first home game following yet another devastating European final loss, did not sell out, but it still sold over 70,000 tickets, enough to fill every single stadium in the Premier League apart from Old Trafford. The fact of the matter is, if nobody cared about these games, as many confidently but wrongly love to imply, UEFA and FIFA would just get rid of them. UEFA and FIFA are not charities and are not in the business of doing anything apart from making money. If a competition like the Nations League didn't have any interest, It simply wouldn't exist, and UEFA would use the slot to shove in another Champions League round or some other nonsense. Saying that nobody cares about the international break couldn't be further from the truth. Everyone talks about it, the games air on national television, and the stadiums sell out. If that isn't caring, then I don't know what is. And while we're on this subject, I also see a lot of hatred towards the Nations League specifically as a competition. There is this implication by some that an international break is okay if it's a World Cup or Euro qualifier, but we don't need to be playing in pointless competitions like the Nations League. Apart from the fact that I don't buy that sentiment one bit, people who dislike the international break will dislike it regardless of what's at stake during the games. I'd argue that the Nations League is one of the very rare occasions where UEFA actually did listen to fan feedback and changed the calendar for the better. Before the invention of the tournament, these slots would just be filled with friendly matches between teams of uneven and varied qualities with nothing on the line and nothing to play for. UEFA understood that these games were somewhat meaningless and provided a format to fix it. Look, by no means am I trying to say that the Nations League is on par with the Euros or the World Cup, but it's at least an interesting format designed to pit teams of similar quality up against one another, with a final and a trophy at the end for the winner. Long gone are the days of France smashing Jamaica 8-0 in a pointless exercise where the result was obvious and the game was an exhibition. In this year's Nations League, France will play home and away against Italy and Belgium. Portugal will face off against Croatia. Germany will play the Netherlands and Denmark will play Spain. These are interesting fixtures between heavyweight teams and are vastly more exciting than what was in their place before. Of course, none of this really applies to England, who are matched in League B with Greece, Ireland and Finland, but it's not exactly UEFA's fault that we got smacked home and away by Hungary and got relegated last year. Nobody cares about the pointless Nations League, people cry, and yet last year's final between Croatia and Spain sold out Feyenoord's 50,000-seater stadium, and winners Spain paraded the trophy around the packed streets of Madrid. Does no one care about the Nations League, or do we not care because England are just a bit rubbish? Maybe you'd argue that the international break would be okay if it wasn't for the added workload the players have to endure on the already bloated fixture schedule. I spoke about the ever-growing footballing calendar in a previous video, I'll link up there. Go and watch that one after this one. So for now, I'll just give you the spark notes. Yes, the fixture schedule is probably too cramped, and the workload that the elite players at the very top of the game have to handle is worrying. But why should international fixtures be the ones that suffer? The international calendar really hasn't changed much at all in the past decade or so. After this Nations League tournament, it's an unavoidable qualification process for the World Cup, and then that's that. It's 10 matches a year. Where was this energy and outrage surrounding UEFA's expansion of the Champions League or FIFA's newly expanded 2025 Club World Cup? Where was this concern when all the big clubs in the Premier League flew their squads thousands of miles away to play in lengthy pre-season tours in blistering temperatures and on plastic pitches? Where was this concern when Newcastle and Spurs flew out to Australia to play in a post-season friendly 3 weeks before Euro 2024? If we're going to start cutting games from the calendar, and for the record, I completely understand the argument that says we should, surely we should be starting with reining in bloated club tournaments and meaningless exhibition matches in Australia, America and South Korea before we start looking at cutting international games. People were already unhappy with the quality on display at Euro 2024, and it's a feeling that has persisted for the past few international tournaments. There's a growing belief that the quality of football at international tournaments isn't very good, the games are boring, and they've fallen far behind what the sport produces at club level. There may be something in that, but you know how the problem will become even further exacerbated? By cutting even more international games and restricting managers to even less time with their teams than the comparatively minuscule amount of time that they already have. A big frustration around the international break is the perceived notion that it's a big chance for key players to get injured, and the game would be better off simply avoiding this risk. Apart from the fact that, as I previously mentioned, no one seems to have anywhere near the same level of concern when the players trot out onto the pitch to play in other, much more needlessly bloated competitions. The concern is a hollow one anyway. The harsh reality is that injuries will always occur in football at any level. Players can barely play and they can still get injured. Players can play a 60-game season and never get injured. Players can play 120 minutes away in Europe and be absolutely fine, while players can be rested for that fixture and then pick up an injury 1 minute into a game back in the league. A lot of criticism around the last international break came from Arsenal fans who lamented the fact that Martin Odegaard picked up an injury while playing for Norway. And while yes, injuries to key players is rubbish and no one wants it to happen, Odegaard's injury was an impact-related one, and there's every chance that if he didn't pick up an injury then, that someone else would have clattered into him 5 minutes into the game against Spurs, and he'd have picked it up there instead. You can't really ascertain for this sort of thing. It's just the nature of the game. Players can face horror challenges and come out of it completely fine, while on the other hand, players can injure themselves by sneezing. If we're abiding by this logic that international breaks need to end because players can sometimes get injured, then where does this logic stop? New Arsenal signing Mikel Moreno fractured his shoulder in his first ever training session with Arsenal as Gabriel fell on top of him. Does that mean the players should no longer train as well? Is it too risky to train? Come on, we just have to accept the fact that Martin Odegaard just got a bit unlucky. Another big one you see in international break discussion is around clubs pulling key players from their squads to rest them for upcoming league games. Oh, the club should have just pulled him from the national squad and stopped him from going to play, which is just utterly ridiculous. Apart from the fact that the clubs are, by FIFA's laws, required to release players to their international teams, more importantly, the players want to play. This shouldn't be a hard concept for people to get their heads around, but for some reason it is. Look, you might not care, fine, but the players do. Players dream of pulling on the shirt and playing for their country. It's an honour that almost all professional footballers strive for. Martin Odegaard is the captain of Norway, for Christ's sake. The captain. He wants to play for Norway. Declan Rice is desperate to play for England. Jack Grealish has spoken about the heartbreak when he hasn't been selected, and Raheem Sterling has basically made 2 career moves to try and get back into the England team. As we've already seen, players can simply ask their nations not to contact them if they so wish. It's nowhere near the death sentence to a career that it may have been in the past. But the vast majority of players don't do this because they want to play. And why wouldn't they? As mentioned at the start of this video, the games are meaningful, the games are fun, and the games take place in front of sellout audiences. Of course, this explanation won't matter to many who claim that it's the clubs who pay the wages of the players, and therefore they should be able to block them from playing anytime they want, completely missing the fact that the players do get paid to play for their nations. England players have donated 100% of their national team wages to charity since 2007, and that FIFA, UEFA and the footballing associations also pay out to clubs via insurance if players sustain injuries. So I'm not really having an argument based on finances either. Despite what X suggests, telling Martin Odegaard he's not allowed to go away and captain his country is a surefire way to piss off your star man in the worst possible way. Not that any real manager would ever consider doing this anyway. Ah, but I hear you. Apparently this sort of thing happens all the time, doesn't it? If only your club would take a leaf out of Manchester City's playbook and start making up international window injuries and pulling all the important players out from international duty. While this sort of thing may happen occasionally, this mentality is completely overblown. Yeah, alright, Foden didn't join up with England the last time around, but it also only featured for 45 minutes so far that season and clearly had an ongoing issue. You know who did link up with their national squads? Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland, who both chalked up 180 minutes for their national teams respectively last window. Rodri hadn't even made his season debut for Manchester City this season before he went on and played for Spain against Switzerland. If Pep Guardiola was going to work his dark magic and pull all the good Manchester City players away from their nations, as people say he always does, surely these are the three that you'd pull first? It doesn't happen anywhere near as much or anywhere near to the extent that everyone has convinced themselves that it does. Ultimately, it's important to remember that football does not simply revolve around England and the Premier League. The thought of not being able to watch your Premier League club for a single weekend might be an unbearable one for many, but you can't tell me that the South Koreans don't love a chance to see Son in the national shirt, or that the Croatians don't care about another chance to see Modric carry them for the very few international caps he must have left in him. Maybe you're not English, or maybe you hate England, or maybe you're one of those weird Liverpool fans that are English and still hate England, but it's not all about England. International breaks are important weekends to many people in less developed footballing nations and act as a barometer for how their football development is going. Just last window, the Nations League gave us a San Marino versus Liechtenstein matchup, which led to jubilant celebrations as San Marino secured their first competitive win as a nation in 20 years. Go and tell those guys that no one cares, mate. If you don't want to watch England, no one is forcing you to. There is a whole host of other interesting matchups between nations for you to pick from. And if you don't care about any of this, if not a single segment of this video has gone any way to convincing you, and you simply hate watching all forms of international football, then just don't worry about it. The Premier League will be paused for a single weekend. It isn't going anywhere. Once the weekend is over, Manchester City will be back to smash your club 5-0, and VAR will be back to screw your team out of a vital goal. You don't need to worry about it. The international breaks are a series of one-off weekends across a club season that spans 10 months. The occasional weekend off is going to be okay. I'm obviously not here to suggest that an international break is better or more exciting than seeing the best teams in the world face off against one another in the Premier League or the Champions League, but at the same time, no one is asking you to pick club or country. The games aren't on at the same time. Even if you are absolutely desperate for club football and you cannot bear your weekend without a fix, the club football doesn't even stop. The lower league machine waits for no man, and clubs further down the football pyramid continue to play games. The international break acts as a fantastic chance to go and see your local team. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. I'm fully aware that the vast majority of those who have such a disdain for the international break are mostly angry at the fact that they can't watch their Premier League top 6 club live on Peacock as they sit on their couch in New York, Los Angeles, Vancouver or Seattle. But those cities have soccer clubs too. You could try going to one of those. Look, sometimes international football matches are boring. Sometimes England trot out against a weaker nation and securely pass the ball around for an hour after going 2-0 up in the first half. There's every chance that the upcoming games against Greece and Finland are relatively unexciting affairs where nothing is really learned. I'm sure I'll get a barrage of comments telling me how wrong I am about all of this after England struggle to break down a Greece side who park the bus with all 11 men. But that's football. The same could absolutely be said for any given handful of Premier League matchups on any given weekend. This kind of thing isn't unique to international games, as everyone seems to believe so. The international break can act as a nice refresher, a new start, a time for clubs to evaluate and breathe and ready themselves for the next period in the league. The same can be applied to fans. It can act as a chance to see players playing together who don't normally do so and in interesting ways. It can be an interesting experiment to see how a manager assembles a squad that's flooded with talent, or how one can get the most out of another with very little. It's an occasion for players to be rewarded for their league form, to get the call and to grasp an opportunity to represent the nation that they call home. Euros and AFCONs and Coppers and World Cups are some of the best fun the sport ever has. Even the people who claim to hate international football will be seen standing on the tables and swinging their national team shirts above their heads when the World Cup rolls around. And you can't have these iconic tournaments full of legendary moments in the sport without providing international teams with some level of build-up and preparation. Arguably, there isn't enough time devoted to it, let alone the calls to cancel some. For the pure joy that the big international tournaments bring, it's totally worth it to pause club football occasionally to ensure the sanctity of it, even if the games are occasionally dry and you may have to grit your teeth through it. And if it's not for you, and if you don't care, then that's absolutely fine. Go and watch your local, or go and do something else, because time and time again, it is proven that the players care, the fans care, and the game is better for it. And if you're still not convinced, just get over it. It's just the odd weekend. The Premier League will be back before you know it. It's going to be all right. Right, so last international window, the big discussion online was about the Barclays Premier League, and I missed it, so we're making up for it now. Here's my Barclays 11 4-4-2 formation. You see Jääskeläinen in goal. At left back, Maynor Figueroa. At centre back, let's go for a partnership of Ryan Shawcross and Chris Samba. And at right back, Tony Hibbert. Left wing, Morten Gamst Pedersen, obviously. In the middle of the park, Rory Delap and Leon Osman. And at right wing, Charles Nzogbia. Up top, we have Johan Elmander partnering Roque Santa Cruz. Come on.